Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Fired probationary employees from the Department of Homeland Security and the Interior Department are continuing to challenge the legality of their terminations from last year. This time, they're taking their fight to federal appeals court. The ex-employees are challenging the Merit Systems Protection Board's decision to dismiss their case. For more, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now. Justin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
What's the latest in this long-running legal battle for these probationary employees?
So these are probationary employees who worked at the Interior Department and DHS, as you mentioned. Last year, Interior fired about 1,700 probationary employees, while DHS fired just over 300 of those employees. And this was, of course, part of a much broader wave of probationary firings. But these employees were actually granted class certification before the MSPB last year, and their cases were moving along there until last fall when the MSPB ruled in the DHS employees case that the MSP doesn't have jurisdiction to hear their case because they were arguing that it was a RIF in everything but name only, and the MSPB essentially rejected that argument. And so now MSPB ruled against the Interior Department employees in the same vein, and now they are bringing their case before the Court of Federal Appeals. They just filed a July 7th brief, essentially saying that the MSPB erred in its ruling and that this was a RIF in everything but name only, and that it was an illegal RIF at that. And so now the Court of Appeals has to decide on the MSPB's judgment to see whether it will go back to the board.
And how did the MSPB get to the decision to dismiss these cases?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it was big news when MSPB granted these class certifications to the DHS probationary workers and then to the Interior probationary workers. It allowed them to kind of move forward as a class rather than pursuing individual cases. But the same administrative judge that granted that class certification was the one that rejected the arguments around RIF procedures and sided with the government's arguments that these were not RIFs, that the firings were done based on the employee's probationary status and that therefore she does not have jurisdiction, and MSPB does not have jurisdiction to review that case. So again, the DHS case, the MSPB ruled last September against them. The Interior Department employee case, that just happened in March, and they are able to bring their cases together to the Federal Court of Appeals because those were two extremely similar rulings by the MSPB.
How does this case fit into the broader set of legal challenges against the probationary employee firings?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, there was the big lawsuit last year that the American Federation of Government Employees and other federal employee unions brought against the probationary firings. They argued that, you know, the Office of Personnel Management was the one directing these terminations. They were falsely claiming performance issues, and that thousands of employees had received identical termination letters that their supervisors had, in some cases, said they never wrote or approved. And so they were actually successful in those arguments before federal court. And in September, the judge partially granted summary judgment, ruling that OPM's orders and mass terminations were unlawful. But the judge in that case did not order reinstatement, essentially finding that, you know, it was not meaningful to do that at that point because employees had moved on to other jobs at that point and things like that. And in some cases, agencies had actually already foregone plans to re-terminate probationary employees. And so some had already gone back, but at least in the DHS and Interior Department cases, those employees were largely not reinstated. And so now they're moving forward to still get these terminations settled before the MSPB rather than the big federal court cases that we've seen.
What are the next steps in this particular case involving DHS and Interior?
Yeah, so the government has until September to respond to the initial filing by the employees and their attorneys. And so this could move forward. this fall and play out in the Court of Appeals. And if the Court of Appeals does eventually rule in their favor, then they will be able to again bring their case before the MSPB. And that would be pretty interesting because we're kind of seeing the contours around the MSPB change drastically. As our colleague Drew Friedman reported earlier this week, MSPB is no longer calling itself independent on its public-facing website and in public-facing materials. That comes after some Supreme Court decisions that have called into question or have essentially verified President Trump's ability to fire independent officers and employees. So it's interesting to see, how kind of some of these issues around the MSPB, what they will take up, what they will rule around the ability of the Trump administration to make changes to federal employees, how those contours are going to continue to change as cases like this move forward.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for the update.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.